the provincial funding outlook. Good news is we got the grants last week. Bad news is we're still last in the province. So what we did was at the board's suggestion at our last meeting, we looked at the local boards to us, and by that I mean anything as far west as Hamilton and Hamilton Catholic, and then over through Durham, and then north to York, and everything in between there. So there was roughly about 12 boards, including ourselves. So we looked at the 2014-15 provincial allocation. In this case here, we're second last as a 14-15. And I should mention too, we actually excluded any kind of grant that we had or that we didn't have that other boards did, which was kind of skewing our numbers. So a lot of our other boards, a lot of the other boards had a geographic circumstance grant or a declining enrollment grant, things that we didn't have. So we excluded those from the calculation, just to kind of try to get apples to apples. So looking at the 15-16, now this is now based on the actuals. Our previous numbers were only based on revised estimates. And as we said, revised estimates and the actuals came up with the same conclusion. We are at last in the province at this point. But we have the new numbers for 17-18. And with the 17-18, you can see that the gap is getting larger. So Halton District is now about $200 per student above us, whereas before we were kind of neck and neck for that position. So now there's a difference of about $200 per student, as well as $150 when you look at just the adjusted. So a large proportion of this is coming from Spec Ed, where we're about $50 a student less versus our conterminous board, transportation, as well as the Learning Opportunity Grant. So just looking at this, comparing, again, apples to apples, Halton District to Halton Catholic, if we were to take the average, which for us, our average per student is about $10,350 per student, and theirs is about $10,600 per student. So that's about $150 per student. Take that times the number of students we have, which at the projections time was 33,800, so almost 34,000. That equates to about $5 million. And that's just comparing us per student to the Halton Public Board.
Why the difference?
Why the difference? Well, there was difference in the Spec Ed grant, the transportation grant, Learning Opportunity grants. All those we were less than our coterminous board. As to why, we just don't have their numbers to compare where the difference actually is on a granular level. But on the grant level, that is our difference based on the information the ministry provided on the projections that were given.
Particularly interested in special ed. We have some CEAC members in the room. Roxana?
So just on that, something that is very odd, I would say, in looking at this adjusted number, and actually looking at the adjustment itself, we're even further apart, and it's about $250 per student times our enrollment for next year would be 8.4 million. So, and when we're looking at the adjusted number, taking all the other pieces away. So if we're looking at special education, I think we are about $100 less per student alone in that, Aaron. And transportation, $36 less. So the public board per pupil, same demographic, probably more walkers, more schools, more walkers, same walking distances, and yet the formula assigns more per student. Now, there's other factors involved, of course, but it's just surprising to say. And also for special education, after all the reallocation provincially, we're the second lowest still in the province, and we're still below our coterminous board.
Madam Chair, instead of having a budget strategy session, shouldn't we be having a strategy session on how to fight this with our funder? This seems really egregious. The lawyer should be sitting here in this meeting, not in our in-camera sessions. This seems like something that we should be arguing against. I don't know why we would continue this conversation without being on the phone to the minister tomorrow.
To you, Madam Chair. The candidates in Burlington, Eleanor McMahon, Kevin Flynn, Indira, have promised us a face-to-face so that we can actually outline these specific details for the minister and her staff. We haven't, that yet hasn't been made arrangements for that.
Seems a pretty placid response. We have our local media here. I hope they will be paying attention to this glaring deficit in funding for the Halton Catholic Board.
It is a complicated formula, so this is simplifying it beyond, it's putting it into perspective overall, but the formula itself takes a lot of factors into consideration, so some differences may be expected. It's a little surprising to see just how almost every other grant were below, even from a board that's in our vicinity, same region and so forth, which should be pretty similar, you would think. Sure, the Toronto boards and so forth have different challenges, so they would get additional funding for renewing their schools and other allocations, but even the demographic ones, the log, we are still one of the lowest, if I'm looking at the Learning Opportunities grant, so which is based on demographic, we're the lowest in the province as well. So,
well, it seems indefensible then. If we had a ministry representative here, they would say, well, that's just the vagaries of the formula, or maybe they would have a defense. But if this is the first slide in our budget strategy session, is it meant to placate us and say, well, we have less money, so these are the things we have to live without in our board? Or is it meant to say, this is a call to action for our board to have a response to the province?
And it's both. Having an action actually take place will take time, so we do have to live with what we have in the meantime. We are trying to get a meeting with the minister and have this discussion and just explain how we are the lowest funded board and all these areas. So we are trying to get an audience with the minister just to discuss it further, and by any means the board would really help if we can get even more support and communicate this further.
Thank you. We have Trustee Ian Tomasi, Trustee Danko is thinking about it, and Trustee Marai.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. I'm just wondering, in the Spec Ed package, what is the difference from our board to our coterminous board in that? Do the numbers come into play? Do we have more per, say, 100, like a per capita thing? Perhaps for Dr. Brown. What can you tell me about Spec Ed, why we would get less per pupil than the coterminous board? My understanding is we get a certain percentage from their board because we pay different attention to some of the children. I'll stop there.
To the extent that I can, because this is not my area of expertise, and as it is Roxana's, I do understand when these grants were put in place originally, we were seen, and as well as our coterminous board, as the benchmark for funding in the province. And then every other board starts asking, well, we've got all these other different grants that we're looking for because we've got exceptionalities, and they got more and more money. What I'm having a difficult time with is, so while there is an absolute inequity, I understand it's based on historical, us being the baseline of an efficiently well-run board, is what it should cost per student, and we've kind of, had that moniker now for years. The growing gap for Spec Ed funding particularly, though, is surprising to me as well. We do have similar students. We have a more of an inclusive approach to education. We have less classes, contained classes. Our approach is mostly around inclusion. Our students are in our classes. We run things very efficiently. We're very proud of the way we manage our money in Spec Ed. If you look further in your slides, you see that we've actually reduced our deficit in Spec Ed over the years, trying to be as fiscally responsible as we can while consistently meeting the needs of students. And to be underfunded at $50 per student makes a significant impact. So I don't have an answer to you for that per se, because the the specifics of the funding formula are not something that I'm as privy to, but I share the concerns that you raised.
Just to, on that, it's a very complex formula. So enrollment is one piece. As we grow, we do get some additional funding, but it's a statistical model which is beyond my comprehension as well. So it's a very, very complex formula. The self-contained classes, as Superintendent Brown has mentioned, is also a factor. So if they do run 3 times as many, they will get additional funding to keep them running. So that is one of the aspects that might be the difference.
So, Dr. Doug Wilms, he's the one that came up with the statistical predictive model. He's from the University of New Brunswick, and it looks at postal code actually, and then based on number of factors that go from socioeconomics to the number of degrees in the household, and different ways in which they would predict the student success. They come up with a way in which to predict what the needs will be in a board based on postal code. So that's the bigger picture provincial way that they take a look at how to provide funding. Where that falls short is when we're going up against our coterminous boards, so we're looking at the same postal codes. So the points that Superintendent Goy makes about there is additional funding for contained classes. I mean, our philosophy of an inclusion doesn't provide for that, but it doesn't necessarily answer the per pupil difference though. So they might have additional funding because of different programs that they run, but it doesn't speak to the $50 difference per student as a result of the implementation of the same statistical prediction model.
Thank you. We have Trustee Danko. Did you have something to say?
No, I'm okay for now.
Okay. Trustee Murray?
I think it would be helpful to get to better understand some of the inputs that go into the province's model on this, just to better understand it, because it's an issue that comes up every year, and we talk about with constituents all the time. The other thing is I agree with Trustee Quinn that funding is the entire ball game. So I certainly appreciate the fact that we're reaching out to the minister and our MPPs, and I know you mentioned it when she was last in Oakville, as well in person. But I'm wondering, maybe now is an opportunity to invite, again, like we have done in the past, the 3 MPPs to this room, and we can have a nice conversation after getting some more information. And I think that, if we're not going to do it, why would any other board in the province do it before us? So I think it's certainly within the realm of our role as trustee. And so the only thing I would say is I think that we should kindly ask them to join us at their earliest convenience, and we should kind of be on them to get a commitment as to when that would be.
Okay. So just an updated number for everyone here. This is the 2017 projected numbers for the province. So the province is forecasting $23.8 billion being spent on education. This is up about 800 million over the previous year. And here's our forecast. We're at almost $360 million. So one thing I should mention, though, is this 360 does not include some large revenue sources. School-generated funds is not included in this 360 million. School condition improvement is not included. This is what Roxana was speaking to earlier, the 4 million or so for the capital costs or capital improvements of the schools. We don't have any DCC in here, which is roughly $16 or $17 million. And then there's no deferred capital contribution. So that's essentially offsetting our amortization for the year. So, and the EDC revenue is not in here as well. So education development charges. Sorry, I'm using acronyms and I shouldn't be. So that is not included in these revenue sources in this. This is purely from the ministry. So now this is another slide. We just put in here just side-by-side comparisons to see the difference between what the province has and what we have. Percentage-wise, you can see they're very similar, as they should be, from that standpoint, how much is being spent on pupil foundation and things like that. So budget challenges, I'm gonna hand it over to Roxana for this next few slides here.
Thank you, Aaron. So we're gonna go through 10 areas that represent challenges for our board, and the first one, they're in alphabetical order. The first one being the employee benefit costs. So this particular one, some of the challenges here is the funding gap that remains from even the previous plans, but also going into the employee life and health plans, the provincial trusts. So benefits are centrally negotiated currently, and there's groups that are not going to be implemented by the end of this year, so the implementation goes into the next year. For example, QP, APSSP, and the non-union employees, including the principals and vice principals, maybe as late as February 2018 going into the trust. So what that means, our teachers have already transferred the premiums for the remaining groups are going to skyrocket under the current plan that we have. There's no funding for that. The ministry is keeping track, is asking us to keep track. There's no commitment to fund it. We're gonna have to see. They are funding some of the other transitional costs that as it relates to system changes and so forth, so that we can provide the information that is requested by the trust in terms of managing the flow of data. However, currently, one of the concerns that I personally have, and I've shared this with the ministry, but they don't really have an answer, is the fact that they assume that the average cost for the insured benefits per person, per one employee, one full-time employee, comes up to an amount. And if that average provincially is lower than ours, which currently is, for teachers, for example, it's $1,000 lower than what our actual cost was under the old plan, they pull back that funding. So that for us, in the revised estimates for 16-17, means $1.7 million in a reduction in the benefit funding. What I'm claiming is, you haven't funded at that level to begin with, so why are you taking away the funds? They don't have an answer to that question. They are working on setting a benefits work group to start and look at the benefit funding. I am not sure what that's going to come up with in terms of the funding formula. However, we stand to lose about $1.7 million in funding because they do assume that we're going to be reducing our cost by that amount. So they're saying to the board, it's a net zero impact on your budget because now you're going to be paying into the trust the provincial amount, which is lower, so we're going to pull back the funding for what your actual cost would have been if you haven't moved to the trust. And what I've been saying is, well, you haven't funded us at that level anyway, so we've had a funding gap which will continue. So it is a concern, and the other piece is the transition year next year. We still have groups, and the premiums are going to skyrocket, and we're still working through to figure out what that cost will be.
But all those groups are still provincially amalgamated, so it's not just the principals in our board that we're responsible for. Are they not all across the province in one plan?
Not until they move to the provincial trust. So there's different phases to move to the trust. The OECTA has moved. I'm not exactly sure if the OSSTF or EDFO has as well. Different boards have different phases of implementing different groups as well. So QP, APSSP, and principals haven't moved yet. They are working on a plan. They're setting it up. Everything's progressing, but I believe they have until February 2018 to do so.
There's no way for us to consolidate with other boards to offset the costs?
No, we will keep them under our current plan with Sun Life, and they will assess what the premiums would be. Regardless of the premiums, we are self-insured. We have to pay the actual cost. So but it will be a lot more significant because you're spreading it over a smaller number of people.
Do you have an estimate of what that might be? Because that could, I guess it's unlimited based on the cost.
If I may, just to be accurate, OECTA occasional teachers are still with the board plan, and so while there are some conversations around occasional teachers moving to a provincial plan, There is no, date that has been, confirmed for that, so there's still another group that, we have to continue benefits for, likely going into, well into next, school year. Thank you.
Have an estimate of what that might be, and I guess whatever the over budget number would be, that just comes out of the classroom, the general budget?
So we do have an annual session with our benefit consultant, Mosey and Mosey, and they will have to determine what those premiums will look like for next year, the amount that for the time that they will still be under our plan, and then discuss with the ministry exactly what would happen to those costs. And I envision that they will just not pull back the funding for the entire amount just to kind of compensate. That's what I would think would happen, but we would have to get more clarification at this point. So just on the next slide, the way we structured this presentation is we wanted to have sort of reflection slide, if you wish, for trustees or to engage in discussion. So what can we do about this challenge? And you know, we can lobby with the ministry for sure and ask them to revise the funding formula. But short of that being a central issue, I'm not sure how much we have in terms of input into what we do get in terms of funding. And also, it's a centralized plan, so this is what it is, this is what we pay. It's been set up for us. But I would like to open it up to trustees if they have any comments, any takeaways at this point.
What we could do is alert our constituents to the issues that we have. I know that we are having a town hall on the budget, or at least a telephone town hall, but we could be more direct with what the budget shortfalls are and how they lie in the provincial funding formula that is leaving us X number of dollars behind other boards per student, which turns out to be between $5 and $8 million, by the way. That's what I mean. It's the town hall has a certain amount of people who engage.
Yes. The day after the telephone town hall, we send out the survey to all the parents again, but we also will be sending it to our staff, and we'll be sending a news release, so it's a community. But making it part of the telephone town hall is a good point because you can speak to it and ask the parents that have called in, and the last time around we had 3,000 parents calling in. So we've got a good audience there. I think it's a good idea. Yes.
I was thinking more along the lines of some facts that say, did you know that our school board gets hundreds of dollars less per board or per student? Compare it to Toronto Catholic and Halton board, and here's the phone number for your MPPs. This is how you get their attention.
We are planning to provide a shorter version of the two sessions, the slides, on the town hall and discuss with them briefly, included with some explanation as well for the survey as well. So that information will be captured through as well and for the discussion. So for enrollment trends, our next challenge, our board overall is growing, which we're in a fortunate situation, but we have rapid growth in North Oakville, South Milton, and South Georgetown, where the pressure is, can we fit the number of portables that we need for our students, and can we open the schools any sooner? So it has its own challenges in terms of accommodating rapid growth, whereas we also have declining enrollment in South Burlington and South Oakville, which results in empty pupil places, and smaller older schools are less efficient. The overall school administration costs and the operating costs for that building will be higher than your typical newer building with a larger student enrollment. Overall, the projected enrollment is expected to grow about 260 average daily enrollment for elementary and 525 roughly for secondary. However, we do have still the pressure in the north for growth and the south for declining enrollment. So, yes.
Are we losing money on keeping those smaller schools open? Is the ministry penalizing us right now?
We are the 1 year that has the full top-up funding for underutilized space would be 14-15, and since that year we've lost about over 800,000 per year. So now that it's fully implemented, I would assume that's closer to $1 million that we don't receive in the school operations allocation to keep those schools open, heated, the grounds maintained, and so forth. So yes, that has been phased out, and it's been, compared to that year, about over 800,000 that has been lost. But it's also in terms of efficiency of staffing, the split grades and so forth, and just overall maintaining the building as well. We have to maintain the entire building and not just the classrooms that are filled with students.
Or is that collectively?
Collectively per year, so $800,000 in a year is what we have lost per year in top-up funding for underutilized schools.
Thank you.
Based on our latest full year that we received that grant, which is 14-15. It's a bit dated, but just to put it into perspective. So then, if we go to the next one.
Excuse me, can I ask a quick question? Sorry. On the 800,000 deficit per year, I understand it's collective, but do you have a breakdown per school, per area, or one or the other?
No, the formula is generic. It's overall. So we would really have to go and dig into what schools have what utilization at what point in time when the funding was triggered to figure out. But it is for the schools that are underutilized, so the declining enrollment schools. So especially beyond 65%, every one of those has lost the funding.
Sorry, I don't think we want to get into pitting one school against the other. You are costing X number of dollars to the system because your community has an aging population versus we're building new houses every week on a pile of dirt in north of Dundas. Therefore, why don't we get all the funding? So I think we want to look at the system as a whole and say that we want to have schools available to all of our residents and not pit one against the other when it comes to the overall funding dollars. I'd be concerned about that.
Continue on.
So just a reflection slide just for trustees, whether or not we should be looking at the remaining schools with declining enrollment, any thoughts that trustees may have for this challenge.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair, I think we have to revisit South Burlington. I don't know what kind of timeline staff has for that, but I think sooner or later we have to face the music on that one. And because I can just see this 800 is just going to keep growing. I'm not trying to pit one community against another. It's just reality is reality, and we do have to face it at some point, like it or not.
So the next one is the facilities and the renewal needs. So this just continues on our discussion. We do have aging facilities and increasing maintenance logs. we are one of the lowest funded for the school renewal as well, and that formula is based on the facility condition index. And if our schools are well maintained, and on one side we do have a lot of new schools as well, so we're fortunate that those don't generate school renewal grants. But some of our aging facilities, for example, we need to pay attention and make the investments necessary to maintain them all up to par. And this area of the budget, when we look at the school operation budget, the school operations allocation overall, it's although it's increasing with enrollment, it's being used at the end of the year to balance the budget. And it has been through deferred maintenance, deferred repairs, making, stretching the dollar as much as we can. But at the end of the day, we're taking a look at it, and if we do need to cover off anything in the system and make sure that we direct all the dollars to our students' needs, this is typically where it comes from. There are additional revenues for the use of our facilities that we generate. The costs are covered within Giacomo's budget, and the request every year is that those revenues are put into a capital reserve so that we can use them for a renewal to complement the school renewal grant for our schools. And we have been some of it have been allocated there to the extent that we can, but at the end of the year we do draw the line, and if we can, we put them through. If not, they do go to the bottom line as well. So it is a challenge if we're looking at the backlog increasing and maintaining our schools. It's always been a balancing act for the board, and Giacomo's team has done the best that they can with the funding available to them. So I just wanted to put it back on trustees on the floor and get their input.
What is the unfunded amount for that Ontario Accessibility Act, Ontarians with Disabilities Act? How much are we looking over the next, I guess, full implementation that is unfunded by the province?
Pass it on to Superintendent Corbaccio for more details.
Through you, Madam Chair, to Trustee Quinn, at this point, the ministry has not given any significant funding to school boards for the OADA compliance requirements. We've, through Joe's department, we've been tackling issues as they arise, and we have a plan to upgrade our facilities. We have until the year 2025 to make them compliant, and as that time gets closer and closer, I think the focus will be on how to make them more accessible to everyone. So we're working towards that, but at this point, there's no major funding that's been provided to us. And in fact, when we did our analysis, Ryan and Josh, our department, did the facility condition index, and we tried to introduce our needs for our AOEDA, and it was like not required at this time type of thing. So they're not addressing it at all at this point. But we're not ignoring it. We're handling it, and we're accommodating each one of our students and our staff as the need arises.
So faith formation is the next challenge. We are committed to our faith formation initiatives, and it's key to our Catholic system, and there is no direct funding for this. So this just illustrates our commitment. We are spending every year $1.3 million in this area, both in salary and benefits as well as various other areas and investments. There's been additional funding that was requested and put up for a program enhancement for the adult faith within the Thomas Merton Catholic to allow an opportunity for all of the staff and instructors at that location to participate in this initiative. So really, we are all committed to this area. The discussion, if we go to the next slide, is should we continue, increase, decrease investment in this area?
1.3 million divided by 34,800 students is $37 a head, according to my calculator. Do we think that's a large investment in faith formation? That seems pretty minimal to me for a Catholic school board to be spending less than $40 a head on faith formation. If that's what differentiates us from other boards, I think that $1.3 million seems like a lot, but it really isn't a lot. So my suggestion would be, yes, we should increase that amount to the highest level possible.
And we do reevaluate all of our activities related to our faith formation. There's also programs that happen every few years, and then you'll see a difference in that budget going up and down to incorporate those additional ones as their cycle comes up and they're offered again. So the next one, we're looking at French immersion program. This is a mandated program from the board, and it provides transportation as well. So the boundaries are different than what they would be normally for the home school of that particular student, and there is no transportation funding for optional programming beyond their school that they should be assigned to. So this particular one is looking at two challenges in terms of this program. One is the challenge to recruit sufficient staff for the current program that we have, and I know that our steering committee is looking into this matter in more detail. And the second challenge from a budget perspective is the transportation for this program. So the costs before you are the incremental costs for this program and the incremental revenue. It does generate some revenue based on enrollment, but the incremental costs exceed in both cases for early and for extended French. And for incremental transportation costs, for example, if we're looking between the two programs, it's about $500,000, just over $500,000 alone that is estimated in optional transportation programming for this optional transportation for this program. So if we go to the next, and a couple of the staffing that are here are as a result of smaller class sizes as the grades progress as well. So the next slide is, what are the challenges here? So looking at the delivery and the ability to recruit staff, but also thinking about transportation. So I wanted to put it back on the floor for trustees for consideration.
Well, I don't believe we're doing too much different in September, which is going to be where your budget comes in, and then it will depend on the recommendations made by the ad hoc committee to the Board of Trustees and what the Board of Trustees decides to do with those recommendations. So that would be September of 18 at the earliest. Anyone want to comment on that? We have trustees on that committee? No? Okay.
So information technology is another pressure. The annual cost to maintain our existing systems and platforms are increasing. There's an increase in classroom technology and the support required for that, and also there's a changing need and for protection of security and privacy of our data, and maintaining a strong infrastructure is key to protect the board against any security or privacy breaches in terms of access to our through technology, access to our information. So this has been a long-standing issue because it's another one of those budget areas where we do request for some additional funding to increase certain things or add on to the infrastructure. But by the time we get to the budget, we have to cut it back down and do with what we have. Again, we've been stretching the dollar as much as we can. At this time around, there's also a request for an increase of, I think it was about $340,000 that was put up for additional investment in technology and a staff force dealing with the security piece as well. So, yeah.
Do we have a report on the return on the investment in information technology? I know it's been a trend for many years. We talk about, what do you call it, the 21st century learning, is that what the buzzword is? But for the amount of money we're spending out of educational dollars, are we seeing improvements in the outcomes of our students? And that's, I think, where we should be making these decisions based on not the latest software that comes across our tables or the latest technology hardware that comes available to us, but has what we've done in the past improved the outcomes for students? Has it increased their opportunities for post-secondary advancement or careers? Or is it just something that we do because we do it and we're continuing with this snowball effect on technology?
Perhaps I'll start off and maybe ask my colleagues to comment further. This question, we've asked this question at the consultation for education funding with the ministry, and they are looking into how to evaluate that data. They haven't actually had an answer for us, unless your colleagues know more. But what they were saying is that they're looking at the actual, provincially. So this is more provincially than just by board. So that's what was shared with us in the education one. There could have been different sessions, and I see Lori shaking her head, so she could provide further information. But the IT budget here is what sustains our system. There's additional funding that's being received for our board through code and additional grants that provide funding for learning in the classrooms. This is supporting all that platform.
Superintendent now?
Just to comment again on measuring that impact, so that return on investment piece. And as Roxana mentioned, we certainly do leverage the funding that we get from code, which I think amounts to about $570,000 so far each year for the past few years. And we put a lot of that back into the technology, but along with it is the learning piece. And so that has been the big question on code's table as well. How do you measure the actual achievement and attribute it back to that 21st century learning pedagogy? And it is a difficult piece, and it is something that has to take place over long term. So they have turned their minds to it. When we are developing our projects that we're using for the learning, we're using our research department to really help us get to the heart of the questions. And what we've been able to take a look at is the depth of the learning that's taking place, the spread across our system, how sustainable is that learning for both the staff and for the students to carry on, and then of course the ownership of that. So trying to make sure that the staff have certainly bought into the learning and are firsthand with it, but also then propelling that on to the students. But to actually measure the achievement level being increased just due to that one factor, because there's so many factors that go into our achievement for our students. So it's the ministry's turned their minds to it, but we don't have a full answer on that.
Thank you. The way I read this, and I have for a few years, has been not that it's so much the information technology and curriculum. It's more the capital. It's the capital. So just as we look at the facilities themselves, and by the way, I think that's like a good point. We should look at ROI. But to your point, are we looking at just as we do with our buildings and what investments we're making in our buildings to get savings long term? I'm wondering how we're looking at look at our largest expense, staff, and they do a great job, but there's so much automation available, and maybe it's not so applicable to school boards and to the education sector. Certainly not classrooms, obviously, but in board functionalities, have we looked into or talked with other boards as to how we could purchase capital to improve our own processes, save money that way?
Yes, we do belong to a number of various purchasing consortiums, and just around our region, and one is provincial as well. And a lot of them have economies of scale type of pricing, so we are shopping around to make sure that we do purchase for the best price that we have out there. That's been the case, and we always look for those savings when we make purchases of equipment. I'm assuming when you say capital, you mean the actual equipment that we purchase for technology?
Yeah, but just like any process that we have within the board itself. So I'm sure there's software that make HR. I'm sure you have lots of them, right? That make it better. But do we do a constant review because so much is changing at such a fast pace? Are we looking and spending time on, hey, we need to invest a lot of money, but it's going to provide us this amount of savings per year?
I'm not sure if I'm answering the question you're asking. Are we making an investment into something that could save us money in the future, or are we talking about collaborative spending and making sure that we purchase for the right price something that we actually need to purchase?
Yes, or it's more of a, are we doing regular reviews of our processes in the board to look at what else is available and is it like annual? Is it quarterly? Is it?
It's actually I would say with every purchase, and there's so depending on what we do purchase through competitive bids, through consortiums, we shop around to see what the best prices are, regardless if it's IT, if it's any other type of purchases. So we do. It's a big network, I guess, out there that offers pricing for the education sector for various things, and we make use of all of those in terms of achieving savings. So if we can purchase something for less next year, we always, when the need comes up, we always look at all of our sources.
Maybe I'm not answering your question, but like we're looking at a new finance system, BAS system. So we've asked, we've talked around to other people what would be the best system. HR, like we continually monitor that. We know there's a new student information system coming on board. So we're analyzing all of these things so that our infrastructure can support the new technology that's coming on board. And also with that comes cost sharing, which is another way that we do save. So we do a lot of cost sharing with boards and other partners as much as we can. So I guess we have been discussing this, what are your inputs into investment into the infrastructure to support the technology overall in the classroom and the system. I'm not sure if anybody else had any other comments before we move on to the next one. So the labor negotiations, this one has some good news, I would say. It's comes with an extension of the collective agreements to 2019 and some additional staffing that are identified within it, which will provide great support for many of the areas within our board. One of the challenges is what will happen after the 2 years. Will there be a commitment to continue that support? So we're going to be integrating them within our system, and then what happens 2 years down the road to the $3 million a year commitment. And then the employee benefits, again, the continuation and the transfer into the trust we discussed before, that's also part of that negotiation, central negotiation. So all we can do is to lobby with the ministry. So one other message that we want to put out there is to look, one of the things is centrally negotiated is a sick leave plan. So the design of the sick leave plan needs some attention and revision. And also lobbying with regards to the benefits and making sure that the benefit funding closes the gap. Because right now they are not. They're just pulling some funding away from a board like ours that incurred additional, like a higher cost for the benefit per person, and giving it to another board that had a lower, maybe a more basic plan in the past. However, had they funded at that level, it's not clear, and the ones that we can tell, the answer is no. There's certainly not enough funding based on the cost that we had incurred. So just opening it up
on the floor.
Just two questions. I'm wondering if you could provide us with maybe like a ratio of the number of students over non-classroom like the non-classroom staff budget. It's looking at what you already give us, but obviously most of our expenses are salaries. Most of them are negotiated and we can't touch them, and frankly, we don't want to touch classroom staff. We don't want to touch any staff. But I'm wondering about what the growth is of non-classroom staff is in the board year over year, both individuals, but also just the inflation of salaries as well. And the other item is, I know that we have in the past shared staff with other boards. Hamilton Catholic, I think we have on shared staff from a central board. I think we've had like half staff or half a staff person on the finance side when we were doing certain things, if I'm not mistaken. But are there opportunities in certain roles with the board to actually, where the expertise are similar but may not require a full individual? What have we done in the past, and is there anything we can do going forward to work with other boards to have staff work on similar projects that may benefit both boards?
So in terms of the non-classroom staff, for example, there's a lot of it that it would be still directed at students as well. So we probably need to be a bit more specific in terms of what are we looking for. If in the prior session, if you recall, when we said here's the amount, the percentage of our expenses or funding that we spend directly on students, that was, if I remember, 81% is directly in the classroom on students. Another 15% was your school operations, the capital side, and so forth, transportation. So put that together, you're really left with about 4% that has to deal with other staff and administrative and central support. So that's what we're talking about. When non-classroom can mean a lot. Certs could be non-classroom, for example. So
I'd be happy to clarify and also get advice too as to what different definitions we could, may or may not be helpful. But I think the idea of looking at, we know the growth and the investment the province of Ontario has made in classrooms and teachers in the classrooms and various groups, which is public. But I think it's also important to know what our organization is. So we know that we're a growing board. I think it's good to know what isn't public, or what is within the data that you give us, but it's not easily parsed. How our staff are growing here, or in administrative roles at schools. I think it just would help us see how that growth rate is compared to past years. I think there's a problem. I think organizations should constantly look at. So if we're not do we know what the salary inflation at the of non-union staff is at the board? Like that's I think a reasonable question.
It's the same across. It's whatever is negotiated by the union groups would be the same with the non-union groups. Just there was 1% or 1.25 previously, and 1.5 overall for the next year.
And again, we bring those types of reports to the board whenever there is non-union increases, and so that information is shared through salary advisory and to the board. And so they have been generally in sync with the union groups, with the exception of executive compensation, to which that still hasn't been addressed.
So it would be, and I appreciate your comment that like it's brought to us on a regular, as it comes up, and it's fair, but maybe having a year-over-year analysis looking at the last 10 years, whatever's like easily accessible would be at least informative. So
in terms of the salary overall, a lot of them are So looking at, of course, teachers are looking at staffing based on class sizes, mandated class sizes. Then we do have special education is based on our staffing model, needs, particular needs and so forth. If you look at the school administration, there's a funding formula as well that sort of shows what is like a principal, one principal per school. If a school is really small, which we don't really have those rural schools, they may be a 0.5 of a principal. There's a vice principal that gets triggered at this level. A secretary or an office assistant gets added at this level. So all of those ratios are also, the staffing is also ratio related, and I'm not sure if Superintendent O'Hara can correct me, but I don't think those ratios have changed in a number of years. They're the same ratios as we've dealt with before. I'm trying to think. The custodial staff have a particular formula to be allocated based on square footage and so forth, and activities in a school. If there's evening events, weekend events at that particular school. So all of those have different triggers in terms of staffing, and then you have your central support staff. So are we looking for the central support staff? Okay, so just to be clear, because when I'm saying non-classroom, custodial are non-classroom.
But I'm trying to look at our board website just right now, and there's a business services organizational chart that comes under your lead, and there's 30-odd names under there. So that's the kind of thing I think we'd be interested in knowing what the costs are, how many staff, have they increased, have they decreased, and what the overall costs are. I think is that correct, Trustee Marais? Is that type of thing?
So the sick leave costs, we've sort of touched on before. They have been increasing. Overall utilization has increased by 5%. Most of our staff, over 70%, I believe, last time we looked at, I believe it was based on 15-16 numbers, over 70% of our staff have to be replaced if they are on leave. So this is a very costly challenge for us. The new sick leave plan design has changed provincially, so centrally, and also the negotiated terms centrally are restricting management's ability to manage attendance as well. So it's been a real challenge for boards, and as we said before, I believe there's really a need for the ministry to take a look at additional funding or looking at the plan design, so that one or the other, and we have been mentioning this to them, and not just us, but other school boards across the province as well. It remains a challenge yet again for next year.
So in the last two, I guess there was a round of negotiating, and then there was an extension of the contracts. The sick leave benefits weren't changed in any way to address these concerns of boards?
The sick leave plan design hasn't changed. I do believe there may be some criteria in terms of leave of absences and things like that, earned leave plan, but not the actual sick leave allocation and so forth. That was designed into the 2012-14 Memorandum of Understanding. The special education remains again one of our challenge, particularly as we're committed to working with all of our students with exceptionalities and helping them transition to independence and integrating them in our programs. We are the second lowest per pupil funded board, even after the reallocation across the province. Now again, there's different factors that are taken into account. So as I mentioned before, the self-contained classes are part of your special education allocation. So once we offer less because we have an integrated model, other school boards may have more, that will show additional funding in that envelope. But overall, even with that allocation, most of our increase in funding is due to growth as opposed to additional funding being received in this envelope. We do remain in a shortfall position. I do assume that this is just the reality. We're not the only board. Of course, it's the norm that the boards have significant deficits in this area. We are managing very well with the resources that we do have, and being the second lowest per pupil funded board in this in the province for this allocation. So the funding gap does exist. Some good news is that both OECTA and APSSP extension of collection agreements come with some additional funding that are specified to help students with exceptionality. So we are getting some support for the next 2 years, which is definitely good news. But whether or not it will continue beyond 2019 still remains to be seen. So just bring it back on a reflection slide. I'm not sure what trustees consider, continue with our support and commitment to students with exceptionalities, just bringing it back to the floor for trustees to comment.
Fall of 1.6 million this year means that we spent more than budgeted by 1.6 million, or we spent less than was allocated to us by the province, and we spent no more. Can you tell me what you mean by shortfall?
It means that our expenses are less than the allocation. So the budgeted expenses, right now we're looking at the revised estimate, so we haven't completed a year. Where we are today versus what the revenue stream is for this allocation shows that the revenue is below our expenses. Our commitment hasn't changed. We are going into the budget with approving this amount because we have a commitment to our students. There's additional, the special education is one of those gray areas, again, that the ministry can't quite pinpoint what are the additional supports from other grants that are meant to support special education. It mentions in the technical paper that other grants are meant to support special education, but it's not really specific, so you can't quite say, and then they have an enveloping form, so their financial form, or they're doing their enveloping to say, okay, are you in a deficit position or not? Here's your funding. Here's all the funding sources that we gather from our own funding formula. Put in your expenses, and this is what you get, and that's how you get your shortfall. That enveloping doesn't pick up those additional pieces that they say are meant to support and complement special education either. So, if we were to take those into account, are we still in a deficit? Probably, maybe not, but they can't tell us what they are, and even their their enveloping formula doesn't pick them up.
Through you to Dr. Brown, if we at the budget table said we have to stick within our allocated funding from the province and we can't afford to go over it any longer, what would that mean to our board?
Through the chair to Trustee Quinn, I'd actually connect back to the explanation that Roxana had, and if you said that to me, I would respond in a similar way. What gets reported a lot is that spec ed, and you read in the newspapers everywhere that the spec ed's over budget. It's not that we're spending more than what our budget is. It's that the ministry asks us to report on those specific areas of special education. So the per pupil amount, the SIP claims, the designated special education amount, which was the real. There's 6 different ways in which spec ed specifically is funded. So they ask us how we're spending our money based on that. However, Roxana really rightly points out that even embedded within the GSN, there's provisions that are supposed to be for spec ed. So there are things that are in there, the certain dollar amount that's meant to support paraprofessional supports, that is embedded in the GSN, that's meant to support students across the system. So to say that we are over budget is more it's more a function of reporting back to the ministry on how we're doing based on money that they've put aside specifically for spec ed, but whatever else is covered out of the GSN was always intended to be so. So my argument would be that to reduce or to say that we can only spend what we have to report back to the ministry as spec ed only funding would be really ignoring the intent of other measures of funding, one of which being the GSN, that specifically embeds supports for spec ed students in there. So it's kind of a misnomer to say that spec ed is always, over budget per se, because the money was always intended to cover the shortfalls. And when you look at the technical paper, it really does speak to the fact that they use language in there that does say this funding is intended to help to cover spec ed costs as well. We just happen to report on those specific spec ed funding that the ministry provides. So my argument back to you would be that we are using the money appropriately.
So is there no way for us, Roxana, to report that in a way in our budget that shows that, our expenses that we put on the spec ed programs are actually funded and we're not going over budget, or we don't have a shortfall, it's just that it's allocated through different means, and that way we don't have to look at it, what can we do, spend more, spend less, or stay the same, but rather what we're doing is industry leading and we are funding it appropriately. Is there a way to make it come out that way?
So just to, and I answered that as well, but just to come back to the question, spec ed isn't over budget. We budget on purpose that amount because that is the need in the system that we are committed to. So, but the funding, related to the funding in the envelope that they specifically identified, just like every other school board in the province, we're over that funding. They are not mentioning what amount from the other allocations is meant to support spec ed, which is why they haven't brought it into the enveloping. And there's another one of those wonderful special education working groups being put together to look at this specifically, at the special education funding and how to fix the enveloping. So they're actually working on how are we going to capture in that enveloping form all the sources from the other allocations that are meant to cover and support special education. So it's a work in progress, and we really are very curious to see what they are, because they don't have a quantifiable number. It's more of a, they just mention it's meant to support, and it is meant to support special education and special needs because it is based on needs and not an equal proportion of enrollment, depending on boards as well, and depending on the strategies that we have. And I do know that I have colleagues that are asking us, our deficit is one of the lowest, so they're asking us, how do you staff so efficiently? How do you stay so close within your allocation? And I always give up the name, and I have the phone number. Just call Superintendent Brown. He'll let you know all about our strategy. And they are seeking our advice in terms of our staffing on how they can seek efficiencies. So special education isn't over budget. It's within the budget that we allocate and the commitment that we make to the program. I just wanted to clarify that. The funding that gets pooled within the ministry's forms isn't complete, but they don't have the answer of what it is. So I can't say this is how much it will pull from other sources because it's not quantifiable. My feeling is they're sufficient to cover the shortfall, and we are stretching the dollar as much as we can to provide the kind of programming that we do for our students.
I do appreciate Trustee Quinn's industry-leading comment in spec ed, but that we are the board, though, that other boards do come to and look at how we're staffing, how we're using evidence to support our decision-making, not doing things the same way all the time, but really be thoughtful about why we're doing what we're doing and how. And, it is industry-leading across the province, the work that we're doing.
Okay, so transportation is our last challenge, and this one here, again, it's a very dated funding formula, one size fits all. It has its flaws. It has not been keeping up with cost increases. A 2% increase for the cost of transportation, it hasn't been enough. Our consortium has been one of the most efficient in the province as well. It's always been looking at efficiencies. It's looking at route optimization. Every year, We have been within the allocation up until this current year, when we expect to have a shortfall of about 400,000, and next year we expect it to be even higher as the costs and the rates go up. The provincial driver shortage is expected to continue in the future unless there is a fundamental change to the funding formula for transportation, where they would allow a better wage compensation package and benefits to the school bus drivers. The ministry has made a commitment, publicly announced, the working group, as I mentioned before, to take stakeholder input not only on the funding formula but on the intent. What is the intent or the coverage supposed to be for student transportation within the province? And we are all waiting to see what happens. I do know that our transportation general manager for the consortium sent a very long email to the ministry with all the faults that she sees in the funding formula, and then this comes out. So I said, they listened. So hopefully they did listen, and it's not going to be next year. We are going to have a deficit. We may have to make some harder decisions, but I'm hoping that they will look into a different model for funding transportation.
What are we allowed to do by way of changing the transportation we provide? Are we allowed to have a surcharge for transportation? No. Are we allowed to remove or lessen the services we provide to students for transportation if the parking lots are full of parents dropping off their kids and empty buses are pulling up on a regular basis in elementary school? So what can we do? What kind of power do we have other than taking what they have, taking what they give us, spending more, and having to take it out of our budget?
So first, as I mentioned, there's a lot of efficiencies that are being considered by the Transportation Consortium, and we work collaboratively with our coterminous board so that we have the same walking distance. We coordinate bell times so that we can use the same bus for different routes and different runs, and more efficiency. So the same driver does a lot more trips for more schools and more students and picks them up to be as efficient as we can. What can we do? We can look at optional transportation, as I mentioned before, for optional programming, like French immersion. That is one decision. It's a board decision, not a mandated transportation for students. And we can also review again whether or not we can find more efficiencies, whether or not it would warrant reviewing the walking distances, increasing walking distances, decreasing ridership. But it would have to be consistent with the public board, because we have seen, it's been proven that there's efficiencies in having the same walk distances, and they've been just recently reviewed as well and adjusted. I'm not sure if Fred has any other input into this, but that's a couple of ideas.
Maybe just two minor things through you, Madam Chair. One of the other things that we do is the consortia continuously looks at bus utilization, so that if there is an event where there's a surplus of empty pupil places, bus seats on a bus, let's say if the bus is half empty, then they would consolidate or reduce the size of the bus to accommodate for that and remove some of the overages. So I know, I forget the exact number, but it's well above 80%, the high 80s in terms of utilization, so we're really maximizing that usage of the bus. I guess the other thing that we were looking at, they're exploring right now, is potentially a bell time review to see if there's any additional efficiencies here or there, and maybe making minor adjustments. So that's still one of the preliminary things that they're looking at. But otherwise, I think they're one of the highest, they are the highest rated in the province right now, as per the last E&E review that was completed. And they're really, all the other consortia are looking to our own in order to make theirs more efficient and maximize usage of what resources they have.
Did the province, there used to be a moratorium on competitive procurement for school bus contracts. Has that ever been lifted?
I'm not sure about the moratorium, but it is a competitive bid, so it's going through RFPs across the province as well, so it depends on what contracts you currently have. It has to be a formal competitive bid, an RFP process that is put out for the new routes that come available.
I mean, the province came up with the consortiums in transportation several years ago. I forget which year it was, 2008 or something. This was sold to school boards, or it was imposed upon school boards at the time because it would be cost saving. So, have there been any savings from sharing services with our coterminous board within the region? It looks like there has not been. Given this, and I also recall that there was a recommendation some years ago about having user fees for service, a modest user fee for people who take the buses. And I mean, even something like that would incentivize people, to go against the number of empty seats that you see on buses.
You mean for people, the students that are not eligible, if they wanted the courtesy?
Well, I think if you're paying for something, you're going to use it, right?
I'll have to take that back, but I'm not sure that there is an ability to do that. We do have, so we provide buses for extracurricular activities, and those are differently funded. So yes, for those you can put as part of the cost of the trip, for example, for the student to pay. So things like that, but transportation to and from school for eligible students is based on the policies that we do have, and eligible students should be transported at no cost. So just a quick slide on some budget priorities, some of the focus for our school board, continuous focus, I should say. Is not that we're just going to be picking it up next year, but so we're looking at, directing the resources to support student achievement. Everything we do is about student achievement and making sure that our initiatives support the learning environment and increase our scores for our students. We're also looking, and again, these are in alphabetical order just because we didn't want to rank them. It's more for trustees to discuss, to identify other priorities, to what is more important, identify what is more important or less important, and so forth. So they're in alphabetical order, just to clarify that. We're always looking at proactive recruitment and talent growth and succession planning throughout our system. Identifying operating efficiencies, coming back to Trustee Morai's questions. We're looking at cost-saving opportunities constantly, and we're looking at maximizing revenue sources. And time permitting, if trustees are willing, the next couple of sections, that's what they were for, identifying some of the cost-saving initiatives that we're looking at, but also looking at revenue generation opportunities. And they focus primarily on attracting more students and retaining more students at the secondary panel, filling up our empty pupil places in our secondary schools, and looking at various ways that we can do so and have a positive impact on student achievement. We're also looking at implementing the pupil accommodation review for Northeast Oakville. That will be coming up as a transition year for next year if we need to start, depending on the ministry's responses. There's not going to be savings to realize for next year, but it is just something that we're looking into implementing and putting that into motion. Improving the community partnerships and maximizing facility rental. It is a key for us to maximize our rental for our facilities so that we can transfer as much as we can afford to in the capital reserve for school renewal purposes.
On that topic, there was a letter from one of the unions about the procedure for that, and concern that students and teams were being potentially shut out of the space in the schools. Have we had a discussion about that at this table, or have we had a response to that letter?
You, Madam Chair, yes, I did respond to the secondary unit on behalf of there's no, they can choose, and use our schools as they need, they just have to book it through the principal. We were trying to just get them to put the dates down and not leave it open-ended so that we don't maximize other community use. That was the intent of that memo.
If they need it and they know they have a volleyball team and they play for 3 months, they can book all the practices they need, and then when it's not in use, we'll know and we can maximize the revenue.
Again, it's important to put it in our capital reserve so that we can use those funds for our schools. Improving student retention rates and attracting more students has always been a focus for our staff, and we are looking at our additional programming and tracking additional students and growth and so forth, and they have been successful, and we're continuing into next year. Maintaining and enhancing the IT infrastructure is another one that will be a proactive investment for the board and allow us to continue to grow, but also to support and protect against any security and privacy breaches. Maintaining and renewing our schools, providing a Catholic learning environment for all learners, so our faith formation investments are important for our system.
10 p.m.
Are you moving it, Trustee Quinn? Yes. All right. We're looking at also providing equity and inclusive environment for all of our students and staff and our community members, and reviewing empty pupil places has been a focus as well. Supporting pupils with exceptionalities, promoting independence, our special education strategy as we've discussed on the prior slide. So these are all of our system priorities for going into the next school year, and where we would like to focus our attention and resources. And we wanted to put it just briefly on a slide, but getting the trustees' input into what you see that is more of a priority, more important versus not as much, or any additional areas for consideration.
Yes, Madam Chair, I'm just wondering, I believe some of the students have tests, et cetera, so if they could be excused.
Okay. You just want to leave with them. All right, we appreciate our student trustees being here. You have a good evening. Go home safely. Okay. Your ride's not outside, you come back in? Okay. So we'll continue on so they don't feel
I just wanted to put it out for trustees to discuss some of the priorities. What is the trustees' priorities? What are some of the important areas we should take away for this budget cycle?
We've talked about this before, I think more informally, but and this is a very niche item, so maybe not as appropriate for the full budget priorities, but I can make it into a larger category, and that's STEM items, and specifically, if you want a specific one, it would be the robotic teams at our schools, which have funding issues, like systemic funding issues. So it is niche, but if it's related to STEM, I think it would be good, and you'd see the outcomes right away as well. Yeah, if I may, so I've talked with I've talked with the Holy Trinity team, and they actually get advertising. They go out and get companies to sponsor them, and it costs, if I'm remembering this correctly, about $15,000 for every entry, including the trailer to actually move the robots to the competitions. And so they've been actually funding this through corporate sponsorships. And I went to the I went to Holy Trinity when they were fundraising for it also with Ford Canada. And I saw that the Halton Catholic District School Board logo was on the robot. I said, "Oh, how much do we give?" They said nothing. We just put it on the robot. So I thought the least we could do is, maybe make it fair to see if we can fund in some way or find funds through schools or through some board budget, but be able to have other schools create their own teams for this. And I think it goes directly into how we want to encourage students to get involved in more STEM activities that actually produce, which have positions available in the workplace. So we're looking at 10 to 15,000 per school, or whatever the subsidization would be.
My question just, I think, is, so we have 12 bullet points here. Trustee Marai had a good idea. I'm sure in every trustee's head there are priorities. But this was a stumbling block I've seen in the last 2 budget sessions, was how do we have a frank discussion with numbers connected to these so that we can make those decisions? Because I think the next step will be, okay, trustees, we presented this to you over 2 sessions, and here's the budget based on your lack of feedback, perhaps, and this is what we see. So when I look at the next slide about cost savings, there's $400 million in our budget, and there's $250,000 in cost savings. What's the percentage there? Less than 1%? Less than 0.5%? So my question is, what is the role of our trustees again as we are going through this process? Well, I get tired of asking all the questions, and I feel like I'm wasting my time and my breath if all we're doing is listening and then going forward without input from what the elected trustees want to do and what their priorities are. And I appreciate your asking us, but the silence is deafening to me.
Well, I guess it's not as much silence as it is, we are a growing board. We are the lowest per pupil funded board. Finding efficiencies is what we do every day in everything that we do. Those are more, they're itemized, so we're targeting certain things, but within our budgets, we have to stretch the growth within what we have and what we've had last year and what was the year before, and a lot of the non-salary budgets have not increased, but the needs of the system have, and we're addressing them within. That is a huge undertaking, and it's a huge cost saving if you want. Can it be easily quantifiable? It's every one of us doing it every day in our jobs. So yes, there is something very specific on those slides because it's above and beyond trying to find additional savings, but considering we're growing, that our budgets are not necessarily, other than staffing, because and there's certain things that you have to pay for. Utilities are going up 40%. I can't find any savings in that. I can't. You have to pay the bills. There's so many mandated areas, and really, I do understand Trustee Quinn's question. What can you do? Well, a lot of it is mandated. I don't think we can do a lot about what's mandated and the bills we have to pay. It's more making sure that we direct the most money to the priorities that we do have, and if there's certain areas that we think need more investment, that we try to reallocate funds from where we can into those areas. And I'd like to know what those priorities might be for trustees, which is why we've put this here. So we've done the 2 sessions in providing that information and giving you, here's our challenges, here's where we spend the money. If you want certain things very granular, we can do so. The budget report that comes May 16, hopefully if we have the forms, and we can, and in June, has 40 pages worth of appendices and numbers in it, and we've gone through them before. The information is there. If there's something specific, we're more than happy to provide. But can I put a number right now, directing resources to student achievement? I can tell you again, it's 95% of our funding. I can't put an actual more than that at this point in time. So to say that $250,000 is our only savings, it's just looking above and beyond what we do every day to maintain the costs within the funding that we have with the growing board. So I hope that puts it a bit more into perspective, but
If I think that the funding for the per student for faith formation is low, and Trustee Marai thinks the STEM budget should be increased perhaps in the robotics program, and Trustee Rowe has some issues, and Trustee Carabella has some suggestions, and we've heard priorities from the senior staff in the last meeting. I feel that we're stymied here, and if you say we only have so little wiggle room and all these competing priorities, that I'm not certain that the trustees are making the decisions, but that we take your best advice and we go along without real input. I know you're providing us the opportunity right now, but I don't see the input happening.
we can definitely add those and quantify. So Trustee Marai, for example, mentioned $10,000. Well, we have 9 high schools. I would assume that the Adult Learning Center does not have that program. So we're looking at 90,000, 100. So we can quantify them. You want to identify them, we quantify them, we add them to the new initiatives list, and then it's a balancing act. So then we see where we are and what we can put in, and then we put it all together and see what we can fit in, what we reshuffle, and we put it in to the extent that it's available. I don't see why you can't provide that input, and I can quantify it and provide it at the next meeting. We still need to see what we can fit in. And the exercise that does happen, when we put everything through, we have program enhancements, if I recall from the last board meeting, about $3 million. Those are the things that we think we need to manage growth. Well, they don't always go in. We have to, and that's where, it's not savings, but out of the $3 million, maybe we can only put in 1, because that's all we can afford. And what happens? Every staff who has a budget has to work with the budget they have and deal with growth. And that's where the savings are for the year. So there is another opportunity, more than one opportunity, to go through and see where we are, what is the amount of money we have available, and then determine whether the staffing recommendations of here's what we think we need in terms of new new initiatives, because the program enhancements is more needs in the system, but here's the new initiatives that we need. Which ones do you absolutely need to put in, and which ones we can still afford to put in or reallocate funding towards? And that is the exercise, and you have an input in that.
Well, Madam Chair, the way the board the way trustees make decisions is by bringing motions forward and voting on them. That's how things get in and out of the budget. So if trustees want to go and sharpen their pencils and write some motions and bring some notices forward, they can propose things like they put a motion forward saying that we will have an AP program in Oakville and to put it into the budget and things like of that nature, and so on and so on and so on. We have a list of ins and we have a list of outs. So I see cost-saving initiatives with a list. If trustees don't articulate that in a clear resolution and make a decision on it, then it will be left up to staff and the director to implement or not implement what's here. And if we just talk about it all the time, we don't make a vote on a clearly worded resolution, then our input won't be taken into account. That's pretty much that simple.
It is that simple. I can say, having sat on both sides of this table, that it's an extremely difficult job that senior staff do. It's downright brutal. You have the easy part, we all do as trustees, of saying yes or saying no, but they go through it for days and days and days, and it's really very, very difficult. And if we put something in, something's got to come out, because it's like your home budget. You've only got so much money. Where do you want it to go? So it's a matter of priorities, and what they go through is absolutely painful compared to what we do.
Madam Chair, if I may, we have a list of revenue-generating activities that we could go through first and vote on those as a group or as one by one. and see where we get to those. I mean, there's no I don't think there's a cost to support a revenue generating activity, right? So if we could get through those, and then at a next meeting, and then look at any potential cost saving initiatives or shifting things around from one area of need, of lower need, to one of higher need. Well,
Had different sports and activities for kids. They all want in. The churches, of course, have special rates, i.e. free, but everybody wants in, and they don't understand why they cannot have their school gyms and so forth after hours free of charge, because of course they are the ratepayers, and there's a certain logic to that. But it is a valuable fundraiser for our facilities people who are trying to keep our schools together these days. So it's not easy from wherever you sit, but our job is to make sure we do our best for our board. So any suggestions that you have as trustees will be most welcomed. So ideas, if you want to go home and think about them, and send either myself or Paula or Roxana an idea of what you would like to do with budget. I think that staff has done an admirable job in presenting and preparing for this budget. They've given us a lot of information. So if you think of anything that can help us, by all means, yes.
Madam Chair, what do we have set aside in upcoming meetings for talking about the budget further? Do we have meeting time set aside for it?
We do have that that town hall next week from 7 to 8. If we wanted to sit down at 8 o'clock and talk about budget, maybe we could, if staff has the time and to prepare and what have you. Well, that is, but if you want more time, that's what it is. That's where we have it. You're asking for more time. Or else we go to board meetings in May or find other dates, but May, Education Week is in there. But I mean, if trustees want an extra session, we'll find something. Or we'll try and ask the director to juggle the agenda so that we have some time like we did tonight.
There's free reports that are coming forth, and they will give us a better picture. So for us to have a motion to do this right now without having the big picture might not be necessarily the right timing. We need to run the numbers through and then see what doesn't fit in, or what trustees would like to be reallocated. I would suggest we start with the list of what trustees believe are priorities. There's no reason why we can't put one together. That's why we have these discussions. But also through those free meetings, when we have the budget report, it contains that information. The lists are there. Here's the program enhancements. Here's the new initiatives. If there's new initiatives that want to be put forth by trustees, there's no reason why we can't just add them onto the list. It doesn't mean they're making it into the budget at this point. They're there, we cost them, and they're up for discussion. So there's those opportunities as part of the meeting on this May 16 and beginning of June 2nd, I believe it might be, to have those discussions. And at the last board meeting, I believe Trustee Marai had mentioned, we were over, so we said, here's all the program enhancements in. We haven't even put, new initiatives have not made it in. And we were over, we're in a deficit position, and they said, well, and the board as well agreed, go back and balance the budget, and that's what we did, and we came back with, here's what are some of the areas where we reallocated funding, we reduced funding, and so forth, and balancing the budget. And that's the exercise that we do, and that's the input that we seek or the trustees can provide. We have priorities here. By any means, we would like to hear what your priorities are or what you think are more important. There's no reason why we can add them to the list. So I don't believe we need a motion necessarily right now, and committing to something right away before we even know where we stand might not be the right time. with trustees' will to go past the cost savings. I mean, these are assumed. We are going to do these. I would assume everybody would agree that we should find even more if we can. But if we would like, in the interest of time, to go to the revenue generating, we can quickly go through that. It's up to trustees.
Sure.
Okay, so Aaron, I'll quickly go through it and then you fill me in because I know you've worked for costing a lot of these. International students, we've been very conservative of calculating international students' associated costs. We've considered every student generates the ratio for triggering staff. The truth and the reality is that we strategically place them in sections that are already available, so they don't all generate additional staff, but there are some additional supports in the system to ensure that they're successful, ESL support and so forth. So this is a very conservative approach. Our net revenue, I expect, is quite a bit higher than what we have there, but we wanted to just put in all the staffing as if they all generate new sections. So if we look at 16-17, we've increased in enrollment to 176, and the total the net revenue is about 24%, so 472 if we can consider all the staffing. And again, I'm sure it's a lot higher than that. The next slide shows, well, what do we expect next year? We already have registrations for 230 students for next year. They're interested in our schools, and if we look at there's some additional costs that we're asking as a program enhancement to continue to grow this program, some additional learning and promotional material, and there's some additional staffing identified as well as a coordinating vice principal or like a program lead coordinator for this program in order to allow it to go beyond the 230. If we look at the 230 that we have currently in the system, we expect about $800,000 to be our net revenue. You can do a lot for that to redirect it in the classroom. So how much can we grow? What can we continue? I think we need to reevaluate every year. I do believe this is an area where we get to keep these students. They come back. They don't just come for a year. Most of these students return, so we have them from grades typically 10, I believe, onward, and Superintendent Pinelli can explain more. But the target would be to continue to grow it. We reassess it annually because there might be a time when it's too big to manage and not worth to go beyond a certain point. So, we may not want to have 2,000 students, international students, for our size of the board, but we do need to take it 1 year at a time to figure out when we are the most efficient.
Quickly, that's understood that you need to work with it. So are we doing an analysis of what the optimal size is for the board in the next the sweet spot in the next 5 years? Further, I know all the work, I know the increases that have gone on are significant, but how do we know it's a good target? Maybe 230 students is it's obviously good. It's larger than it was last year, but who's to say that an achievable target is not 500 students next year, which could significantly increase the net revenue for the year. So who decides that, and how do we track it?
Superintendent Pinelli?
Actually, we have been working on that, and that is connected to what Roxana has been talking about earlier. We talked about declining enrollment. The strategy is for us to, in fact, fill our empty pupil places. And so the schools that we're targeting are the schools that have availability, rather than overloading high schools that are already in a portable scenario. So there is a strategy, and is 230 the max? No, absolutely not, because I've done the analysis already, and we've got a lot more empty pupil places in Burlington, as you heard earlier this evening, and in certain schools in Oakville. Definitely not Halton Hills, definitely not Milton, and definitely not STA. So those are the schools that we are targeting. But our program is also now reaching into the elementary, because we are expanding and our reputation is out there, and that we're marketing, so we are getting our return in terms of our reputation as a school board in certain countries, and we need to continue to promote, as you can see from the slide, in different areas of the globe. We are also being approached for elementary, which is something that is new for us and that we're just beginning, and that can become lucrative for us. But that is in the horizon as well. So we are exploring different areas. We do have a plan. We're looking at maximizing where we have the empty pupil places.
Through you, Madam Chair, we've been incrementing the size every year, and like I said, we're trying to find that sweet spot to the point where it's still a revenue generating and it's not costing us more to staff or to service students. And once we see that downtick, then we know we're kind of in the spot where that's probably the maximum amount of students. But we haven't hit it yet, so we're not concerned right now.
I'll be very clear, but the only question I would have is, why not try to get to that point like faster? Why, like, do you, and the question of the board would be, do you need to hire more staff to get us up to that point in a faster period, and is that investment worthwhile to hire 2 people at $60,000, $70,000, I don't know, for X position to bring in to get to that point? Like, and that is potentially a budget discussion item that we could have. But I know you've done the analysis, and maybe just a little bit more detail on it would be at the very least interesting.
I think you also have to respect the market dictates. We are doing the best we can given what we currently have been promoting, and I think we've done a phenomenal job in attracting from certain areas of the globe. We need to expand we can't be putting all our eggs in one basket. We need to expand, and you're correct. That's why part of the budget process is to have a vice principal to assist myself in order to expand into those other markets.
Yeah, thanks. My concern, I think this is a great idea if it doesn't impact the educational experience of the residents, and if it's a bunch of students who don't speak English coming, what's the impact there? But do we have, I don't know what we've been learning, do we have the expertise to be in this business? We have superintendents traveling across the globe representing us, but shouldn't it be a commissioned salesperson who is out there getting as many potential students for our board as possible and having remuneration based on their work? So, that's the kind of way I would look at it. If it's business development, if it's that field, should it be educators doing that, or should it be salespersons doing that?
Having attended only one, and Superintendent Cipriano can speak further with his experience, you need an educator. You need educators because the questions are going to be asked about programs, about education. I'm not sure a salesperson can answer that. We are making contacts with agents who are the ones that are going to be the ones that are brokering and working with the families, but you need an educator on the front line to be able to answer all the educational issues that come up. And so that's the critical piece on this.
Sure. Through you, Madam Chair, just a couple points. Number one, the question by Trustee Mariah about what is optimal. I remember when we first started promoting and started expanding the international operation about 3-4 years ago when I first got in the portfolio. We recognized that it's profitable no matter what, no matter where these students enter. Even if we are having to staff them at the current rate that we staff our schools with our Halton students, it still is profitable. The reality is if we can place them in empty pupil places, the profit margins go up. In a purely business model, it's profitable. We recognize, though, there are other challenges, non-financial challenges by just adding students, as Trustee Quinn mentioned. You know, there's going to be challenges to staff. There's going to be pressures on our own students, and so we intentionally tried to gradually grow the program so that those pressures weren't so obvious on a year-to-year basis. So the good news is that there's definitely room to grow, and especially because we have empty pupil places, it is win-win. From a marketing perspective, Trustee Quinn is also correct that some school boards employ recruiters, full-time recruiters. Most post-secondary educational systems, so universities, colleges, they almost exclusively employ recruiting agents, let's say, or sales. From my experiences with agents across the world, what we lose possibly in business savvy when we're on the road, when Superintendent Pinelli's now been doing this, and when I was marketing at different parts of the world, what we lose in that business savvy, we gain in our understanding of the system. So many times agents have questions about schools, questions about programs. You're dealing with families. Many times at student fairs, you're actually meeting with families. And so to be able to speak genuinely about the system, about the experience, there's been many times where agents have come to our board, and I've taken them on tours of our schools, and for them to see that I know the schools, I know the staff, I know courses and course selections. So it's going to be you can probably make an argument either way. That like I said, there's what you gain, you lose. But I think ultimately what I've experienced is that the ability to speak very intimately about our school system has been a benefit to our system, and I think it shows in our numbers. When I was in the role, when I was working with other superintendents from across the system, they were shocked at our rate of growth. They really couldn't believe. They were asking me, "How are you doing this?" And I really couldn't take credit. I think it's a testament to our system that our schools are so popular around the globe.
Thank you, Superintendents Pinelli and Cipriano. We are now past 10:30, so can I have a motion, please, to continue? Trustee Quinn, seconded by Vice Chair Trites. All in favor? Okay, we failed to reach, I guess, unanimous agreement there, so we will stop. So on behalf of everyone here, I'd like to thank Roxana and Aaron for doing a tremendous amount of work, and please also to your staff, to all staff who have worked so arduously to try and get the budget pulled up together in order for our presentation. Thank you. Everyone has the correspondence and the information items, both for the in-camera session and for the public session of the board meeting. So I leave that up to you to study that on your way home. And we need, not while you're driving, and we need a motion, please, to excuse Manuela. Trustee Quinn, Trustee Marai, all in favor of excusing Manuela. Thank you. In terms of adjournment, can I have a motion to adjourn, please? Vice Chair Trites, Trustee Carabella, all in favor, thank you. And who is doing the closing prayer tonight? Trustee Quinn.
Perhaps I could get you all to turn to page 9 of your board package, and we'll read the Angelus. And I will lead as the teacher and ask that you all respond. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. The angel of the Lord declared unto Mary, and she conceived by the Holy Spirit. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Behold, the handmaid of the Lord. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. And the Word was made flesh. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Pray for us, O Holy Mother of God, that we may be worthy of the promise of Christ. Let us pray. Pour forth, we beseech Thee, O Lord, Thy grace into our hearts, that we, to whom the incarnation of Christ, Thy Son, was made known by the message of an angel, may His passion and cross be brought to the glory of His resurrection through the same Christ our Lord. Amen. Holy Spirit. Thank you.